WADR, promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar and 1 p.m. in Abuja. Good afternoon and welcome to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, 94.9 FM and on online at wadr.org. First, our top stories. Senegal's President Diomaye Faye arrives in Bamako as ECOWAS seeks to reopen dialogue with Sahel states. Guinea courts acquit Colonel Lamar in landmark trial over 2009 Conakry Stadium massacre as victims' groups announce an appeal.
We are not satisfied with the decision. It is an unjust decision. We will immediately appeal so that the trial can resume before the Court of Appeal in Conakry.
Sierra Leone's parliament set to vote on key constitutional reforms, and Ghana begins second phase of evacuation of citizens from South Africa amidst tensions in Pretoria.
And I must place on record, if Ghana is taken out of the free visa arrangement, Ghana will also have no option but to immediately reciprocate.
Please stay tuned for details of the stories and more.
On the news, this is a more edit.
Many thanks for joining our broadcast. Senegalese President Diomaye Faye has arrived in Bamako this morning for talks with Transitional President General Assimi Goïta in what is his first major diplomatic engagement since taking over the rotating chairmanship of ECOWAS. The meeting is expected to focus on strained relations between the regional bloc and the Alliance of Sahel states as efforts continue to restore dialogue with Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso following their withdrawal from ECOWAS. Usman Umar has more details in this report.
The visit comes as ECOWAS continues efforts to reopen dialogue with Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso following their withdrawal from the regional bloc in 2024. The talks are expected to focus on the future of relations between ECOWAS and the Alliance of Sahel states, particularly on regional security, economic cooperation and the free movement of people. Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso left ECOWAS after disputes over sanctions and the bloc's response to military takeovers in the three countries. However, both sides have kept communication channels open. At the 69th ECOWAS summit in Sierra Leone on July 19, regional leaders renewed their commitment to dialogue with the Sahel states and tasked the ECOWAS Commission with strengthening engagement, including exploring possible security cooperation against terrorism. President Bassirou Diomaye Faye has previously been involved in efforts to bridge the divide. In 2024, he was appointed by ECOWAS to facilitate discussions with the three countries, although those efforts did not result in a major breakthrough. The Bamako meeting will therefore be clearly watched as Senegal seeks to play a greater role in easing tensions and finding common ground between ECOWAS and the Sahel countries.
That was Usman Umar with the details of that report. Well, the Senegalese government has announced that it will lift the suspension of student associations at the country's largest public university, Chez University of Dakar, months after they were banned following deadly unrest on campus. The move is part of a broader effort by authorities to ease tensions and restore dialogue between students and university administrators. Deborah Moore gives us the details in this report.
Senegal's Minister of Higher Education, Research and Innovation, Boubacar Camara, has announced that the government will soon lift the suspension on all student associations at Sheikh Anta Diop University of Dakar, widely known as UCAD. The minister said the authorities would meet with student representatives as part of a renewed effort to strengthen dialogue and improve relations within the university community. Boubacar Camara also announced plans for a social pact bringing together students, lecturers, and administrative staff to establish mechanisms for resolving disputes before they escalate into crises. He said the initiative is intended to strengthen student participation in university governance while preserving the rights of academic staff and promoting dialogue over confrontation. The announcement comes as Senegal seeks to improve stability across its higher education institutions, which have frequently been affected by protests over living conditions, university services, and student representation. Student associations at UCAD were suspended in February by the university's academic council after violent clashes between students and security forces led to the death of medical student Abdoulaye Ba. University authorities described the suspension as a precautionary measure aimed at restoring calm while investigations into the unrest continued.
That was Deborah Moore with the details of that report. Elsewhere, Sierra Leone's parliament is expected to meet today to debate and vote on proposed constitutional amendments that could reshape the country's electoral system ahead of future national polls. The reforms include changes to voting procedures, voting counting, electoral administration, and candidate eligibility. Authorities say the proposals are intended to strengthen transparency and improve public confidence in the electoral process. The vote follows months of consultations and institutional review, with lawmakers expected to decide on measures that could significantly influence how future elections are conducted. Political parties, civil society groups, and election observers are closely watching the outcome, describing the parliamentary vote as an important test of Sierra Leone's democratic institutions and long-term electoral stability. Now, in Guinea, Transitional President General Mamadi Doumbouya has carried out a partial cabinet reshuffle, retaining Prime Minister Amadou Uriba while making changes to several key ministries. The reshuffle affects strategic portfolios including education, territorial administration, defense, agriculture, and trade, as the military-led authorities continue effort to reorganize the executive ahead of the country's planned transition to civilian rule. Veronique Njai has the details.
Guinean Transitional President General Mamadi Doumbouya has announced the partial reshuffle of his government, introducing new ministers and reassigning several others while maintaining Prime Minister Amadou Uriba at the head of government. Among the key appointments is Bintou Keita, who now heads the Ministry of National Education, Literacy, Technical Education and Vocational Training. Jainabou Touré takes over the Ministry of Territorial Administration and Decentralization, while Ibrahima Khalil Condé has been appointed Minister Delegate to the President in charge of national defense. The economic sector has also seen changes, with Abubakar Koroma becoming Minister of Industry and Trade. Felix Lamar, former Minister of Livestock, has been transferred to head the Ministry of Agriculture. The reshuffle comes as Guinea's military-led government seeks to strengthen state institutions while implementing its political transition roadmap. Observers say the changes will be closely watched as the authorities face growing expectations to deliver reforms and keep the transition process on track toward constitutional rule.
Veronique Njai with that report.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
All staying in Guinea, court has acquitted former Gendarmerie officer Colonel Bienvenu Lama in the landmark trial over the September 28, 2009 Stadium Massacre, a case widely seen as a major test of accountability for one of the country's worst episodes of political violence. The decision has drawn an immediate response from civil parties who say they will appeal the verdict. Here is a report by our correspondent, Cheno Afa Ibrahima Baude, and presented by Abdullahi Hassan.
Lama, who was a military instructor at the Kalia camp at the time of the event, had been accused of involvement in the violence that followed an opposition rally at a stadium in Conakry, where security forces killed and injured civilians and where several cases of sexual violence were reported. In its ruling, the court said neither the prosecution nor the civil parties had presented enough evidence to establish his responsibility in the alleged crimes. Defense lawyer Zizi Kalivogui welcomed the decision, describing it as a historic judgment.
I am extremely satisfied. I am truly overwhelmed with joy. We fought this case with everything we had, and thank God the truth has prevailed and justice has prevailed. We give thanks to God because we have emerged victorious. Our client has been acquitted because he is innocent.
However, representatives of the victims have criticized the verdict, arguing that it undermines the rights of those affected by the September 28 violence. Their lawyer, Bernard Sa Disimilimono, announced that an appeal will be filed.
We are not satisfied with the decision. It is an unjust decision, an unlawful decision. We will immediately appeal so that the trial can resume before the Court of Appeal in Conakry. All the evidence in this case shows that Colonel Bienvenu Lama was the one who mobilized the personnel. Those personnel were then deployed to Conakry and subsequently to the September 28 stadium, where they committed some of the most horrific crimes against civilians. If the court considers that the evidence presented was inconsistent, then that conclusion is contrary to the case file.
Human rights organizations say the ruling represents another significant moment in the long-running judicial process surrounding the September 28 massacre. They have called on all parties to use legal avenues available to challenge the decision if they disagree with the outcome.
That was a report by our Conakry correspondent, Chez Ibrahim Abadi, and voiced by Abdullahi Hassan. In Mali, prosecutors have requested a one-year prison sentence, including 6 months suspended, for journalist Chahana Takio over comment he made about the country's justice system. The case has drawn attention from media observers who see it as another test of press freedom and freedom of expression under the country's military-led transition. Our Bamako correspondent Aliu Cham filed this report and voiced by Gosinkoli.
Journalist Chanan Takiu appeared before Mali's National Cybercrime Prosecution Unit, where he responded to allegations linked to statements he made about the country's justice system. The journalist said his comments focused on the functioning of the judiciary, particularly the prosecution and detention of other journalists. He had accused some magistrates of bypassing press laws to prosecute and imprison media professionals. The prosecution argued that the remarks constituted an attack on the credibility of the state through its judicial institutions, requesting a one-year prison sentence, including 6 months suspended. However, Takiu's lawyers called for his acquittal, arguing that the accusations were not supported by evidence and that his statements fell within the scope of freedom of expression and the responsibilities of a journalist. After several hours of hearing, the court adjourned the case with a ruling scheduled for August 3.
That was a report by our Bamako correspondent Aliu Cham and voiced by Augustine Koli. Now, Burkina Faso's media regulators fined Canal Plus International 200 million CFA francs for failing to provide free access to the country's public broadcaster RTB for all subscribers. The High Council for Communication said the company ignored an earlier order issued in June when it was fined 50 million CFA francs and given 30 days to comply. The regulator has not said whether Canal Plus will be allowed to appeal or given another deadline. The decision comes as Burkina Faso's military-led authorities continue to tighten control over the media, with several international broadcasters suspended or banned in recent years over national security concerns. Nearly 200 Ghanaians have returned home as Ghana began a second phase of evacuation from South Africa, targeting about 1,000 citizens affected by a month of anti-migrant violence. The latest operation follows an early evacuation exercise that saw more than 900 Ghanaians repatriated as Accra continues diplomatic engagement with Pretoria while providing reintegration support for returnees. Christopher Ticho has more details in this report.
The Ghanaian government says it remains committed to dialogue with South Africa even as it intensifies efforts to evacuate citizens caught up in its month of anti-migrant violence. Speaking to the latest batch of returnees, Foreign Affairs Minister Samuel Okudzeto Ablakwa assured them that the government would provide the same relief package offered to those evacuated in the first phase.
As we did for your compatriots who came earlier in the first round of evacuations, we are going to do the same. We are going to hand over to you travel allowances. We will also hand over to you reintegration allowances to everybody. We are not amending, we are not changing, we are not reducing. It is the same package because you are all valuable Ghanaians.
The minister also sought to calm concerns over reports that South Africa could end its visa-free travel agreement with Ghana. He says Pretoria had made no such decision, but maintained that Ghana would have no choice but to reciprocate should the agreement be suspended.
As the South African authorities have themselves indicated, no such decision has been taken on this matter, which is governed by an agreement applicable on a reciprocal basis. And I must place on record that in these matters, if Ghana is taken out of the free visa arrangement, Ghana will also have no option but to immediately reciprocate.
While both governments say they remain committed to dialogue, Ghana has also pushed for xenophobic violence in South Africa to be placed on the agenda for the next African Union summit. Accra says the crisis requires a coordinated African response to protect citizens across the continent while preserving regional unity and cooperation.
Christopher Dixon filed that report. You're listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, 94.9 FM Dakar, and around the world on WADR.org. Here is a reminder of the top stories. Senegal's President Diomaye Faye arrives in Bamako as ECOWAS seeks to reopen dialogue with Sahel states. Guinea court acquits Colonel Lamar in landmark trial over 2009 Conakry Stadium massacre as victims' groups announce an appeal. Sierra Leone's parliament set to vote on key constitutional reforms. And Ghana begins second phase of evacuation of citizens from South Africa amidst tension with Pretoria. Still ahead, we do have the press review, a guest interview and sports update. Please stay with us.
From the heart of Nigerian politics, this is Yeche Nusasitu in Abuja, and you are listening to WADR 94.9 FM Dakar.
Don't forget you can listen to us live on WADR.org and fuller live streamings on YouTube and Facebook. Now, with just a month before the Gambia's December 2026 presidential election, efforts to unite the opposition are facing renewed uncertainty following the withdrawal of the country's main opposition party, the United Democratic Party, UDP, from Coalition 2026, a platform established to bring opposition parties and independent figures together behind a single presidential candidate. The fallout has exposed growing disagreements over how such an alliance should be formed, with Coalition 2026 rejecting the UDP's claims that it was treated unfairly during negotiations and insisting the party chose to leave after opposing the coalition's preferred structure. Rose Marakates reports.
Speaking to a local media, Askanwi TV, Coalition 2026 spokesperson Hassan Martin rejected suggestions that the United Democratic Party UDP was treated unfairly during ongoing opposition alliance negotiations. He said the party withdrew after opposing the coalition's decision to adopt an independent candidate-led model instead of a party-led alliance. According to Martin, participating political groups reached that decision through a vote, which the UDP declined to accept before leaving the negotiations.
They say they are withdrawing from the coalition for now, on the notion that they are going due to the issue of party-led or candidate-led options. According to them, they are going to consult their party leadership. So it's up to them to decide what they want to do from here, because the coalition is still open. But as for now, we are continuing.
Martin's comment came in response to remarks by UDP's leader Usainu Dabo, who said the party remains open to opposition cooperation but would only join an alliance that guarantees fairness and is not skewed against the UDP. With the polls expected to be closely contested, analysts say the ability of political parties to overcome internal differences and agree to a common strategy could be the key factor in determining their chance of mounting a strong challenge against the incumbent government. For WADR, Rose Samara Cates, Banjul.
This is the newspaper review. Stay abreast and find out what the top stories are in your country.
This is the newspaper review.
The newspaper review.
Well, we cross over to Monrovia as we join Brown Baka for the newspaper review.
This edition features 3 local dailies. We begin with the analyst newspaper with these stories. Bouaka champions historical leadership, pledges to reclaim Liberia's records. White King predates Liberia's rise. U.S. evangelist calls for reconciliation and unity. U.S. Secretary of State salutes Liberia's independence as Washington vows to deepen bilateral engagement. The next stop is the Independent newspaper with these stories. Dr. Jala Bapu, head of the Office of the Establishment of World and Economic Crimes Court, calls for unity, justice, and accountability. Liberia Maritime Authority Board approves strategic instruments to advance digital transformation and revenue mobilization. Restore hope, strengthen unity, Transition Advisor tells Liberian leaders. And the last stop is the New Dawn newspaper with this long story on the headline. Liberia's 179th Independence Day orator urges historical revival. Well, that does it for this edition of Press Review, and it's back to you in studio.
Many thanks, Abraham Parker, with that newspaper review.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
Now, Nigeria is rich in mineral resources, yet many of the communities where those resources are found continue to face insecurity, displacement, and underdevelopment. As the country looks to expand its mining sector, questions are growing over whether local communities are being consulted and whether resource wealth is translating into better lives for ordinary citizens. On the sidelines of the Open Society Foundation's high-level summit on governance, critical minerals and conflict in Accra, Ghana, WDL's Francis Boniface spoke with Bishop Matthew Asen Kuka of the Catholic Diocese of Sokoto. Drawing on his experience in one of Nigeria's largest dioceses, the bishop reflects on the link between insecurity and natural resources, the relationship between government and local communities, and why meaningful consultation is critical to achieving lasting peace and development in Nigeria.
There's very little genuine conversation going on between government and people. The governments across Africa talk down at people because it's probably just more focused on announcing the things we are trying to do, suggesting that people have very little voice in what really happens. So, and I think that a conversation like this should help us understand that there is need to scale up this engagement, because we've had cases of communities being relocated without them knowing what exactly was happening. So for me, you talk about the house being on fire. Perhaps depending on the quality of consultation, I'm not talking about somebody like myself, but even with communities, that preliminary conversations are important to how public policy is formulated, because in that you gain a lot of confidence from.
How about the wider religious institution? Now limiting this to the Catholic Church, obviously, which is your own institution. Before talking about the general religious institutions, how much of consultations do you think, in your experience, is going on between the government?
The problem with Nigeria is we're running almost like two systems of government. In northern Nigeria, mentally, people live in a theocratic state, to the point that the emirs are considered to be, although they are called religious leaders, but they are political appointees. So government believes that by consulting religious leaders, and I think across the country really, and as you can see, even how the Nigerian government reacted, whether it's to the Niger Delta, the focus on traditional rulers very often is just part of the problem, because in many cases, as you've seen, in a place like Zamfara, some of them have been found to be entrapped in the conflict itself. But in Nigeria, there's two slightly different conversations going on. So when you ask the Sultan and I to be on a table, for example, Sultan is religious leader only to the extent that he's appointed, but he's appointed by the government. So northern Nigeria tends to focus on the traditional institutions. But across Africa, the reality is you can raise a philosophical question as to whether feudalism can coexist with democracy. And in many cases, the governments tend to think that rather than dealing with the people, they like to deal with the traditional institutions because they believe that by proxy they are reaching the people. So buying new cars, building new palaces cannot be a substitute, because these have no impact on the lives of ordinary people. So unfortunately for us in Nigeria in particular, the governments have always found traditional institutions easy to co-opt and repeating the same mistakes that the colonial administration did.
What practical role, if any, can the church realistically play in the issue of conflict resolution as it relates to mineral governance, especially because you're from an area where there is a lot of informal gold mining, which many experts say is fueling insecurity in that region? What role can the church play?
Absolutely. I mean, remember that we are more present in Nigeria than the state. The Catholic Church in Nigeria alone has over 600 medical facilities and hospitals across Nigeria. We have the schools, and perhaps some of the best schools in the country. We're far closer to the people than government itself. And we do the things we do without the support of government, even though we're asking government for greater collaboration and so on and so forth. But on the issue of these minerals, I mean, Zamfara is in my diocese, but I don't have the faintest idea about what is going on in Zamfara. I don't have the capacity. There's no way you can step into the situation, because it's almost an entire criminal enterprise. So it's not, and it is fueling the conflict. The tragedy with the Nigerian situation is that people in authority know what is going on. That's what everybody says he hears. The security agencies are largely demoralized, not well equipped, and so on. So we're in a very, very difficult place, very, very difficult place that, and I think that is the question of the government having the political will. So it is government that creates the template for collaboration and cooperation.
That was Bishop Matthew Hassan Kuka of the Catholic Diocese of Sokoto State, northwestern Nigeria. And in sport news, the Women's Africa Cup of Nations WAFCON Morocco 2026 continues on Tuesday with the start of Group C matches as defending champions Nigeria enter the competition against debutant Malawi. The Super Falcons have won a record 10 continental titles and are aiming for another strong campaign, while Malawi hopes to cause an upset in its first ever appearance at the tournament. The group also features Zambia and Egypt, who will meet earlier on Tuesday as teams battle for the 2 quarterfinal qualification spots. The tournament, which runs until August 16 in Morocco, brings together 16 teams, with the 4 semi-finalists also securing qualification for the 2027 FIFA Women's World Cup. Meanwhile, on Monday evening, Tanzania made a winning start to their 2026 Women's Africa Cup of Nations campaign with a 2-1 victory over defending champions South Africa in Casablanca on Monday. Jana Nse gave Tanzania the lead before South Africa equalized through Bamba Nani Mben just before halftime. Hassan Obamba then scored a late winner in the 87th minute to secure all 3 points. The result puts Tanzania top of Group B ahead of the group's second fixture against Cote d'Ivoire and Burkina Faso. Elsewhere, the French Football Federation has officially appointed Zinedine Zidane as the new coach of the national team, replacing Didier Deschamps after 14 years in charge. Deschamps oversaw a highly successful period for Le Bleu, including France's 2018 World Cup triumph, their run to the 2022 World Cup final, and a semi-final appearance at the 2026 tournament. And we've come to the end of this edition of Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Ismaila Kamara Maudoji for the technical support. Let's keep the conversation coming on all of our social media platforms, X, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, at WADR English. Though join Sylvie Wedrago at 1 p.m. for the news in French and for Chez, Vous. I am Imo Edet. Good afternoon.
We thank you for listening to Newslink in Nigeria on Love FM Abuja and Darling FM Owerri. In the Gambia on Hot FM Banjul, Hilltop FM and Veritas Radio in Serekunda. Thank you for listening on Alternative Youth Radio Lofa County, Liberia, Radio Kegaman in Nimba County, and DCN Radio Riverside County. A big thank you to Radio Baft FM in Sierra Leone for listening, and in Ghana we thank Radio Pad in Damango and Royals FM in Wenchi. Thank you all for listening to Newslink.